Good evening, everyone. Welcome to WebChat. I think this is 33.
Wow.
And we're here tonight with Laura Fitch, who is an architect and founder of Fitch and Associates and a designer of co-housing communities. So she's going to talk to us about design programs, how communities go about working out their designs. First, I want to take care of our usual business. I'm Karen Gimnick. I'm with the Cohousing Association, and our executive director, Karin Hoskin, is with us as well. She's waving. And we organize these web chats as a service to the co-housing community and in furtherance of the co-housing movement, which is our mission. And we're so glad that you're here. And we also invite you to support us financially, which is a way that we can help keep these web chats and other services of the association happening. So you can do that through our website at cohousing.org, where you can also see all the other cool information and new things that have been added there in the last few months. Thank you once again, everybody, for being here. And I think I'm going to hand things off to Laura.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Laura Fitch. I sort of live, breathe, and design co-housing communities. I first discovered co-housing in 1980 when I went to Denmark. And then I got involved in the design sort of from the client standpoint of Pioneer Valley Co-housing, where I've lived for 25 years, and then morphed that into my professional architectural career and established originally Krause Fitch Architects with Mary Krause, who many of you may know, and we focused a lot on co-housing design. And then she left a couple of years ago, but still has her own consulting practice, and I do sort of both programming, early schematic design, and full services for architectural communities. But I just came from a common meal, so like I said, I live it. I've raised children in community, but what I'm going to talk about tonight is how to make the early design process as efficient and enjoyable as possible. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out how to, okay, here we go. Just a little history about design of co-housing. Originally in 1993, I guess, or even before that, before we built, but when we were designing it, we were inventing the wheel, because we were one of the first communities, certainly the first one east of the Mississippi, when we designed Pioneer Valley Co-housing. You don't have to do that anymore. There's no co-housing group starting up now that needs to reinvent the wheel. There's lots of resources out there, books, and there's so many good communities to tour. Make a vacation of it, go and tour a lot of communities. And so our goal, and one of the things that we, oh, I'm actually hearing voices.
I will take care of that.
Okay. So we developed a workshop process, actually working with Chris Scott Hansen, who's a development consultant. I give him a lot of credit for helping us develop a weekend workshop process in which we help communities make a lot of important design decisions in an efficient way. And I think some of the early architects who worked with co-housing groups would meet, you know, several times a week and on weekends, and there would just be endless meetings because the group was working with an inefficient consensus process, and the architects weren't necessarily primed to lead them through the process. And they were also trying to reinvent the wheel. They were making decisions about whether or not to have a common house, rather than we're going to have a common house and it's going to have some guest rooms and it's going to have a great room and a kitchen, but what do we want those to look like? So really cutting to the chase. So the goals of having a weekend workshop is that you'll come up with a design program, which is both general and specific requirements. And think of the design program as something like a menu or recipe is to the actual meal. It's, you know, the written information that says, you know, it's going to have 2 eggs and, you know, well, instead it says it's going to have, you know, 32 houses and 64 parking spaces. Oh no, in this particular community, we only need 1 parking space per household, so it's going to have then 5 guest spaces. But it's writing out that information as you make those decisions. And then you'll also, another goal is to come up with some basic design concepts. And so what we call schematic design or preliminary design, whether it be site, common house, or units. And we recommend that you do it in that order. And in fact, with workshops, I don't really have a good photo of this, but we recommend that you do some eco programming early on as well. So you might do site and eco design in the first workshop, then common house design, and then unit design over 1 or 2 workshops. And then another goal of this is that you're building your community. And so as long as you have, respectful conversations, you're actually beginning to implement a budding community governance, because this is early on when you're getting to know each other, and the way you make decisions early on will affect your relationships later. So it's really important that that be successful from the get-go. So the steps that we've established for running a design workshop is starting off at least 2 weeks before the workshop proper. We survey the community, and I'll give you more information about that later. And sorry about my telephone ringing. I'm not sure I have a good way of not having it ring. And then there's we survey, and because through the results of that survey, we actually will build an agenda that will, again, it's not reinventing everything, but we're trying to build the agenda based on what we've discovered through the survey that you need to talk about. And then we have a slideshow typically on a Friday night, and then the workshop proper, which is Saturday and Sunday, and then that's followed with schematic designs. And either we as the architects come back and work on the schematic designs in-house in our office, or if we're traveling at a distance, or if you're working with another architect and they're traveling at a distance, you might have the Monday afterwards set aside for what we call design charrette. So then the co-housing expert and the local architect and maybe the civil engineer, they all get together at a local office and work on the designs together. So that's sort of the soup to nuts. So then the actual survey, what does it look like? This is a survey question, or this is actually information for a survey about a meals work system. So it's not about design, but essentially it's the same thing. In the survey is an opportunity to give you a lot of information. So we might give you information about the design, the site design of X, Y, and Z co-housing communities. Like we can say Burlington Co-housing is a mix of stacked flats in an elevator building and townhouses. And Jamaica Plain Co-housing is all stacked flats, and this co-housing is all single family houses. And we can give you some examples with some pictures and things like that, and then ask you questions about that. So the survey will have informational items in it. And it'll also have suggested program items. So this is the wheel that's already been invented. We know that every successful co-housing community has a great outdoor gathering area. So the common house is the indoor living area of the community, and the gathering area outside is like the outdoor living area. I don't know of a successful community out there that doesn't have a great outdoor space. So we describe that space, and we, to make it be successful, it needs to have some shade. It needs to have protection from the wind, or it needs sun if it's a cold place. It needs sun in the winter. And so we put that information in there and then ask, if you'd like to make any changes or additions or deletions, please add them. So we've given you the basics and then asked you if you have any suggestions. Then there's, survey. You think of survey as questions. So here's an example of a question where this is about prioritizing of design goals. And we're asking you to prioritize like from 1 to 5, 1 being the utmost importance to this community. And 2 being, this is important for the community. 3 is, this is nice, I'd love to have it, but it's not necessary. 4 is, it's not important to me, but I don't object to it. And 5 is, no, this is wrong for me or the community. And then we ask some goals about, privacy within the home, for instance, things for children, accessibility above and beyond the code, questions like that. And those questions have changed over time, because when we first started building co-housing 30 years ago, people weren't all that interested in accessibility above the code. Well, now baby boomers are saying everything has to be visible and accessible as much as possible. So, you know, that priority has changed from being maybe important to being utmost important. And then here's another example of a question, prioritizing common house spaces. I'm going to open my window a second because it's kind of warm in here. Okay, so I'm back. Let's see, prioritizing of common house spaces. So again, from utmost importance to no, this is bad. We're listing from the beginning some of the really basic things like an entry, coat area, guest rooms, great room, kitchen, guest room 1, 2, 3. We might list 4 guest rooms, and by the time you get to the 4th, no, that's too much. And something like a mail and coat area, utmost importance in New England. In California, maybe not. At least in Southern California, what's a coat? So these questions will change, and priorities will change regionally and with age group and whether it's urban or rural. And here's another example of questions about accessibility, for instance, whether there'd be additional like counter type, like a low countertop in the common house for cooking for somebody in a wheelchair, which also serves people like young children well. There's a question about, should the great room be one large space, or should the room be broken into nooks? And sometimes we've shared the survey with a group before we actually send it to the whole group, because there might be sort of a real, like the burning souls who really want to, you know, make sure we got all the questions right before they send it to the larger community. And that's fine, you know, and so there might be sort of some additional questions that they think are important. And then the nice thing about online programming is really easy to get analysis. So this is an example of the analysis that you'll see after you filled out the survey. We'll send this back before we build our agenda. And so this one is about ceiling heights. Would you prefer to have 10-foot ceilings versus like a 9-foot minimum in order to include high daylighting windows? I seem to remember this was a question that we gave to folks in Alaska, where daylight is really important in the winter. And so you see they were yes, definitely, and yes, probably, and very few that were kind of unsure or no. So we might take this information and actually propose in the first draft of a design program that there should be 10-foot ceilings. So you see at the bottom there, it says the conclusion is that we're going to propose that. We sort of make educated guesses based on the survey information that we get back and our general understanding of co-housing and the different communities that we've been in about how to interpret this. And you might say, oh, that's not consensus because one person said no, probably not. And there's some risk in that. If we propose that and that's not true consensus, that person still has an opportunity to red flag it later. And you'll see more of that as we go through this slideshow. So here's another question. Should the great room be one large space, or should the room be broken into nooks? Well, you can see that there's not consensus really here. There's the majority of people said yes, probably. Some said yes, definitely, but quite a few said not. So our conclusion in this case is to put it on the agenda as a discussion item. So this is how we build the agenda for the weekend. So with the first one, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it because there was already pretty close to consensus. This one we know we need to discuss. And so after we've analyzed the survey, what you'll get back is a first draft of a design program. So this is an example of the design program for the main entry porch. What you see in red is new information. So what you saw, what's in black is what you've already seen and made some proposals of sort of standard design program. And in red is all the things that people added in comments or we determined through questions that this is what they wanted. So for instance, they added design to minimize snow removal and ice buildup. Again, this is probably Alaska or the Northeast. I'm not going to get that information from, you know, Southern community. And they're talking about including, you know, some steps or other places for sitting. And, you know, this is, now they're personalizing it with this red information. And we give them instructions that says everything in red is automatically adopted into the final program unless you tell us otherwise. So there's a lot of responsibility that's sent back to the group in advance of the workshop, in which they need to read this and get back to us. And what's highlighted in yellow, however, is going to go on the agenda. So you can see it says discussion items. There, should there be a patio or deck? Should it be covered or screened? So things like that, we then build into the agenda. Oops, I think I went back. Yeah, sorry. So now we've moved from the survey into the actual workshop. And I'm excited to include an example of the agenda. But typically it was, actually, well, typically it would start with, you know, introductions and things like that. But in the discussion area of all the different items, we would guesstimate how much time it would take. Like, we need 5 minutes for this, we need half an hour for this, we need 45 minutes for that. And we make sure we can get it all in. And then we try to leave a chunk of time on Sunday afternoon for like spillover. So what discussions took longer than expected, or what additional things come up. So we build in some extra time. Anyway, so Friday night is a slideshow. It's both an opportunity to do outreach and also an opportunity to learn more about the subject at hand, whether it be site design or common house designs, units. And then on Saturday and Sunday is the workshop proper, and that will be typically introductions and group building. Often we do a guided visualization. There's discussion and exercises to reach consensus on the identified issues. And then we do this block exercise, which is hands-on. And I'll show you more about that in a minute. And then again, it's followed up with schematic design by the architects. So on the slideshow, this is a great opportunity to actually have 2 slideshows. One might be open to the public. And so it's, you know, give a talk on what is co-housing, give information about who you are, give information about the site that you're looking at. Make sure that there's somebody to greet all newcomers. I've actually had feedback about a group that we're working with where they had a sort of potluck get to know you, and newcomers came and felt awkward and didn't feel like they were greeted and didn't know, so it was very uncomfortable for them. So definitely make sure somebody's there to capture the contacts and greet everyone. And then obviously food brings people, so potluck sometimes for dinner or dessert. So if it's an evening slideshow, you might have dessert between these 2 shows. And then you can excuse the newcomers and have slideshow 2, which would be closed to the public, and it would be on the subject of the workshop, whether it be site design or common house design or eco-programming, but it's a much more educational type slideshow. And typically that would only be for, and we've actually had the situation where people showed up for slideshow 1 and said, we want to come to the workshop tomorrow. Can we pay right now? And they've just forked over the $200 or whatever it was for the workshop fee. So obviously then slideshow 2 would be open for them too. But again, it's a nice combination of marketing and information. So during the workshop, when I facilitate, I have my own sort of ground rules for facilitation, and I like to share them with the community, with the group right off the bat. And I recommend this for any facilitator in co-housing, to have ground rules either posted or at least like very familiar in their minds. And particularly if you're facilitating your neighbors, your future neighbors, you know, you just want, it's a good protection for everyone. So right off the bat, I tell people that emotions are okay, but aggression is not. Like, I know there's a lot of emotions because you've got money invested and you're maybe exhausted and you're going to be doing this all weekend and you're concerned about something that came up in the survey that you didn't know how to answer. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons to be emotional. And that, you know, I can deal with that as a facilitator. I ask people to listen for understanding, to use hands to speak. So and then I call out on stacks of 4. So if a bunch of hands, 8 hands go up, I'll count 1, 2, 3, 4. And after we've heard from those 4 people, often the other 4 won't need to raise their hands again because other people have already said what they were going to say. So that's a sort of efficient way to deal with all sorts of hands going up. And I do try to call on different people. When in doubt, like if somebody makes some suggestions about changing the process, the facilitator sides. What I think is really discouraging for groups and facilitators is when there's half an hour discussing whether to go this way or that way, when each of those pieces would have only taken 5 minutes each or something. So we try not to get bogged down in that and just state it right off the bat that we'll make some decisions that might be uncomfortable at first, but we think are good. Silence is assent. So if I don't hear a question, I assume that you're agreeing. You have to ask if you're confused. I ask people to stay on topic, and I'll bring them back to the topic at hand, and I'll use a parking lot or whatever you want to call it to jot down good ideas that are off topic so that we capture them for discussion later, but we're not getting bogged down off topic. Let others speak before you speak again. No side conversations. It's really distracting. If you got to look at your cell phone, go somewhere else to do it. And then this is really a question for the group. Who makes decisions? Who can block? If you're working with consensus or if you're working with dynamic governance, let us know what your ground rules are for who can participate in this meeting. Generally, I think it's a really good idea to let everyone participate in the discussions and in most of the decisions, because even if that person isn't an equity member at this point, they might recommend be similar to folks who'll be joining later. So it's just good to hear them out. Represent, that's the word I was looking for. They might represent the others. Okay, so in the workshop, we usually start with overarching goals. So we don't just jump right to, you know, the dishwasher in the common house. And we recognize that a lot of goals are hopefully not in conflict, but, you know, there's a lot of goals. So it's affordability, it's children or senior, it's green design and a healthy process, it's community at the doorstep and privacy at the home. All these things together are sort of these overarching goals. And you've already told us which ones are essential, which ones are very important through the survey process, and we like to refamiliarize ourselves with that before we get going. And I don't know how many people are familiar with this the group works slide card deck. These are really great. They were developed by members of the larger co-housing community. And there's a stack of about 100 cards, and each one has a title, a picture, a little description. And there's so many different ways to use these, but there's only one way that I've ever used them, and I like it, and my group and the groups I work with seem to like it. I look through the deck before I start a workshop, figure out which ones seem relevant, pass them around, and then between each section, I might have 1 or 2 of them read out loud by people. So it's just a way to sort of like in this case, remind people that that there's a purpose to this exercise for this long weekend of making decisions, and that, you know, the energy that we put into it is important. And it's just having these little breaks and looking at the pretty pictures seem to help people feel grounded. And one of the first exercises we often do is site analysis, and often it means going to the site and looking for the sun and the wind and the way people shortcut through and how to get to the metro, or whether there's going to, if it's a rural site, how can we efficiently bring in electricity and septic, and so there's all sorts of site issues that we might discuss, and we might diagram them. And then we also do this other early exercise, which we call guided visualization, where we have you put your feet on the floor and close your eyes, and I'll walk you through a day on your site, or walk you through a day in your common house. And maybe it's that we imagine going into the common house to get our mail, and what do we see on the way? Who do we hear? Who do we run into? What are we doing? And some people love that exercise, some people struggle with it, but usually some really good information comes out. That's like, I remember in our community, this was 30 years ago that we did this exercise, and a number of us heard laundry flapping in the wind. And in our community, we have our laundry out there flapping in the wind. It's not like in those gated communities where everything, like the laundry's hidden away or banned altogether. So, some interesting things come up, and usually people smell coffee. So then the next thing is discussions, and sometimes it's just turn to the person next to you and talk a little bit about it before we open up to the larger. Sometimes we do rounds. If it's dynamic governance, we might do have everyone talking around. Might be kind of popcorn style. But when we get bogged down, or if we need to get up on our feet, we'll try other types of exercises. So what's diagrammed below is a spectrum. And let's say this was about parking. That if you're on this side of the spectrum, you want 1 parking space per household. And if you're on this side of the spectrum, you want more than 2 parking spaces per household. And you line up there. And what this does is that basically it eliminates from the conversation the folks in the middle for the beginning. And you only need to ask the folks at the extreme why they're there. And they talk to each other a little bit and hear each other out. And then you ask people to line up again. And sometimes it changes a little bit. But it's a really easy, quick way to see if, oh, we're really close to consensus, or my goodness, this is really, there's a big spectrum here. And you can try it then you can ask different questions, one after another, and see how things fall out. And there's always just working with index cards. So in this case, this is prioritizing common house spaces. So all those essential spaces, the great room, the kitchen, are all up the top. But when it gets to guest rooms, they drop down just a little bit. And then a workshop building, you can see here in this particular group, is down quite low. And so you might work in a small group prioritizing like this, and then come back and present to the larger group why you prioritize the way you did. Image boards, so great for talking about architectural vocabulary. And if folks don't have access to the magazines to do this themselves, I come with a whole folder full of images that I've collected over the years. It probably should be updated with, periodically. Now people use digital photographs a lot to do the same. And then my all-time favorite, and most groups' favorite exercise, is what I call the love it, like it, don't like it, but can live with it, can't live with it exercise. So, or in short, love it, like it. What you do is, like, if we look at the top 4 green items on that chart, one of them says all single-family housing. The next one says 50% single-family housing. Then the next one's a few single-family housing. And the next one's no single-family houses. So imagine this is a rural community, and you're trying to decide on whether there should be any single-family housing, because this is a cluster community, and we know it's going to save money to bring all the houses to attach them. But how do we, reach consensus on how many single-family, if any, should be had? And we try to generate as many different ways of looking at it, like from all single to no single. So there might actually be 8 of these here, you know, one might say 5 single-family houses, one might say 3 single-family. You can write these questions any way you want, but the idea is in the other direction, in the columns, you have love it, like it, I can live with it, but I don't like it, and I can't live with it. And every person votes, and this is really a voting exercise, on each of the green items, each row. And so then it's really easy to see diagrammatically that most people love or like having just a few single-family homes because they recognize that some people want them. They don't particularly, or they might like a few. And no one, and you can't see it under my hand there, but no one objected to this. So you're looking for rows in which there's no votes or tallies, tick marks, in the can't live with it. And then after you eliminate those, you look for the areas where the most people like it or hopefully love it. And then the bottom one I have there, it says 1 guest room, 2 guest rooms, 3, 4 guest rooms. You can see when you get to 2 and 3 guest rooms that most people are happy with it. But it's not clear which. Like, yeah, most people want 3 guest rooms, but there's a number of people that are a little bit worried that they could live with it. Maybe they're worried about the cost. So rather than making a decision right now, we could make a decision that's we'll do 3 if we can afford to. Or we'll get back to this question. We know there's going to be 2 or 3. Let's make some other decisions first and then come back to this. But it's a really quick way. And sometimes when I move on to something else like a spectrum exercise just to try to mix things up, people say, no, we want to do the love it, like it one. It's just easy for people to understand, and it's quick. So then after we've done most of the sort of wordsmithing of the written part of the design workshop, we get into hands-on play. And most people like this. And it's using little wooden blocks or other types of blocks on a site plan to design or to come up with some ideas for a site plan or the common house. If it's a sloped site, we really highly recommend a physical model with grades on it because it's really hard to understand how the grading will affect the site plan if you don't actually have realistic grades. We could do it later with a computer, but when you're there doing hands-on, you need kind of the physical format there. And we're not expecting the group to come up with the perfect design. We're actually, this is an opportunity for them to learn about design so that later when we come back with schematic designs, they can understand them more. They can say, oh yeah, remember when we talked about that it's good to have just 50 feet from porch to porch because then you can see each other and talk to each other, and that we wanted the common house to be oriented towards the south. They've done this exercise and then they have the architectural vocabulary. And not everyone enjoys this exercise. It's a little bit challenging. And the other thing that we do is we ask the group to try like radically different things. Like we want one scheme with the common house in the middle. We want one scheme with the common house at the southern end. We want one scheme with the common house near such and such. And we just really sort of force them to try out different things so they can also see why those were eliminated. Like bad ideas are as good to explore as good ones at this level because you want to understand later why you rejected them. And then this is a similar sort of exercise, but for the common house. So each of these pieces of paper represents a different room, and we're happy to have people fold them, cut them, throw them aside, but they place them in some configuration for the common house. And I think this one's even more challenging for folks than the 3-dimensional models. But it's very helpful to have a site plan already generated from the first workshop so that you have an idea where the common house entry should be or where the outdoor courtyard is going to be in relationship to the common house and where the parking is going to be in relationship to the common house and things like that. That really helps in generating this design. And again, we sort of ask folks to try out 2 different entries or 2 totally different locations for the great room and such. And then during your lunch break, it's usually my job or, you know, your other architect's job to synthesize what we learned in that. So, you know, I think the diagram on the right there, which says A2, AB, and B1, those were like a really quick diagram of 3 radically different site plan layouts that we discussed. And ultimately, I think made a decision that we want something that kind of combines AB and B1 or something. Yeah, so we synthesize that and then get some, and sometimes we even take those blocks and place them ourselves right there in front of you to show, oh, well, we like this about this and this about that. And then we can quickly generate a site plan with those blocks. And then after the workshop, the architect's job is to just get much more detailed and much more precise. And the site, you know, you can see it says Schematic Design C on that floor plan. So we're still looking at multiple schemes, but the schemes are getting more detailed so that we can get information about the square footage, so therefore the cost, and things like that. And I should probably check where I am with time. I forgot to mention this. Usually takes about 30 minutes, but it looks like I'm going over time, so I'll try to speed things up a little bit. At the end, you'll get a final program in which we've captured every decision that was made, hopefully. And there might be a few places that we highlight that you're going to have to go back to because we just couldn't answer those. But generally, it's very complete. And you can see this is a sort of a synthesis of the spaces in a common house. And there are the essential spaces, and they all tally up to a square footage of 3,590. That's kind of typical. And it may be that you've made a decision you can't afford anything bigger than 3,500 square feet. So this is really useful information to help you figure out where to make cutoffs in your program. There's more detailed information about the common house, about the porch and decks. And then we're getting into actual design. So following all that programming, the architect starts detailing your buildings and making presentations, and then construction. And then finally move in. And then just to sort of remind everyone throughout the process, it's really about this. It's the people, it's your neighbors. So the architecture should be sort of surrounding and supporting the neighbors. So the site design, and I didn't show you in the program, but there's all sorts of items listed in the site design for places for people to run into each other and have, you know, or places in the common house for you to sit down. And so the design program is really all about supporting community. And if anyone wants to jot it down, that's my contact information. And I don't know if there's a way of, I'll just turn that off, and if people want it later, they can ask me for it. So I'm going to get off of the share and we can have a conversation. Great.
Thank you, Laura. So much detail. I love that. And if you're willing to share your slides, I can post those as well. I
think I already made a PDF, so I could do that.
Perfect. So you'll all have that. So what questions do we have for Laura? You can unmute and just ask, or you can put something in the chat and I'll read it out, whichever is more comfortable for you. You did it so thoroughly, Laura. Nobody has any questions for you. You answered them all.
That's probably not the case, but hopefully people just aren't sleeping. Hi.
Dean, go ahead.
I have a question. A lot of the characteristics of our project are, I think, being dictated by the building codes. For instance, the city of Marysville, Washington, where we will be building, has told us that we can build cottages as single-family homes. We can't do attached buildings like townhouses or that sort of thing in the area where we are. So we have to do detached cottages. We can do a 3,000 square foot common house, but it can't have any guest rooms in it, or that would be considered a multifamily. So we're looking at how do we provide guest rooms in some other building. We think we can do that. But I mean, sometimes all those factors just govern everything, don't they?
Right. So what I didn't mention is part of the initial program, or even that survey where I talked about informational items, is the architect should be providing you that information, or at least have digested it if you've provided it to them, so that newcomers to the group understand that. So, you know, we wouldn't
I think
an example of where the agenda would be culled in such a way that you wouldn't be having a discussion about townhouses, I mean, stacked flats or townhouses, whatever. And you'd get more focused on how people wanted the spacing between their cottages, you know, how close to get and such. There's still a lot to decide in the, you know, common house and the site plan.
So I had a process question, Laura. You said when you send back the survey results, and it's sort of these things in red are now part of the program unless you tell us not to. Do you have everyone in the community respond to you as the architect, or are those to be collected in some way? How does that usually work?
Oh, usually they're sent to one member of the community, who then gives them to me in one fell swoop. So I'm not getting 20 emails, I'm getting one email.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. But then that means somebody in the community is getting the 20 emails. Yeah.
I have been that person, which is why I was curious how it plays out. Yeah.
If there wasn't somebody to do it, it's not a big burden for us, and you know. So the thing is, with email now, you can have it all filtered and go into one little box, and I could choose to just look at it at the end of the time and not, you know, and be efficient about it.
So I have a question, and that is, we're thinking about doing sociocracy at our Eco-Village Charlottesville. And I'm wondering if we should have classes in sociocracy before we get started. We've moved along with the architecture, and we've gotten the county's approval and all of that. We're just, you know, getting ready for the phase of where we're going to have the final plans approved. But should we do a sociocracy class first?
Well, before you move in, I mean, you've already done the design, right?
Yeah, we've done the design.
So we're talking about design programming. I mean, ideally, you would have the class in sociocracy before you even did the workshops. And, or if you knew you were going to be doing sociocracy later, you'd want the architect to be familiar with sociocracy and help you learn sociocracy while you're doing the workshop. But absolutely, before you move in, start taking classes in it.
Right, right. Okay, well, we have a developer who is well versed in what the rules and regulations are, and just like the dean said, the fact of it is, it is very difficult to get things through our system. So
I'm having a really hard time understanding you because you're breaking up.
Oh, sorry. We've got the design done, and we did the design because of the difficulty of working with the county in the zoning regulations, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that work's been done. So I guess we just do the sociocracy classes next.
I didn't catch hardly any of that.
Okay.
Karen, are you hearing it?
Not well enough.
And I'm also, I sound like I'm breaking up too.
We've got an echo effect going somewhere. I think that's probably going to solve it. So Dave, if you want to just type into the chat your question, that's probably a good way to do that. Other questions?
Laura, I'm just wondering, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. How many weekend workshops do you offer, and what are they called?
Yeah, so generally we recommend a minimum of 3, which would be site, common house, and units. But the reality is that, I mean, it really depends how far away your architect is. So if it was local to me, then I would still try to do weekend workshops, and I would add eco programming. So at the beginning, I would probably start with site and eco together, or one or the other first, but try to get eco programming in pretty early. And site design always has to come before common house design, and common house design really should become before unit design. But unit design I would recommend doing in 2 weekend chunks with a week or 2 between. So when I've traveled at a distance, sometimes I've gone, and like when I was in with this group in Alaska, I went up and did the first unit workshop, and then I had vacation, and then I did the second, and I had a vacation up there because it's a nice place to have vacation, and then I did the second workshop. And the way we divided it up, which made a lot of sense, was the first one was focused on the interior, like the layout of like the 1 bedroom, the layout of the 2 bedroom, the layout of the 3 bedroom. And the second workshop was focused on how to bring those units together. So the 1 bedroom next to the 4 bedroom, and how they started looking in elevation.
Mm-hmm.
And also in that particular case, they were attaching some units to the common house. So we were doing an atrium design in which the units were, you know, next to each other in like a long townhouse with an atrium attached to the common house. So the second workshop was not only bringing the units together into buildings, but also integrating site common house units.
Okay.
And then I would also recommend a design development workshop, which would focus on common house kitchen and common house great room details. So you start looking at the kitchen design, and that could be done just with a small subgroup who is interested in the meal system of the common house. You also might have, if you do design development workshop, you might break it up sort of into 4 parts and work with 4 different groups of people. One might be interested in interior finishes of the common house. One might be interested in the kitchen. Other might be interested in exterior colors of the units or something. But, you know, sort of stuff that is design development that is much sort of later on. But it's a great opportunity to sort of bring people back together after you've done all the sort of preliminary design work, and then start focusing again on some going to be tough decisions.
Okay. What do you think about co-housing groups that partner with a developer initially, and they, in turn, the developer takes on some of the risk, and the group gives up some of the control, especially around units, personal spaces, private homes, and so the group maintains all the control of the common areas. Mm-hmm. Would that work still, or what are your thoughts on that?
As in design control?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, a lot of developers really know unit design. I mean, they do multifamily housing all the time, if it's a developer with that experience. Mm-hmm. And so if you've seen their unit designs and like them, then I think that's a fine strategy. And I wouldn't let go of the programming of the common house design, because and I'd be really careful about the site design too, is because I always think that some of the most important community stuff happens between the buildings, not in the buildings. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, site design and common house design, I'd really get involved in. And unit design, it's okay to just sort of be the reviewer of their designs. Like, they should still propose to you, this is what we want it to look like. And then you go like, yeah, but can we do this a little bit differently? And particularly like the front porches, or if it's attached housing, stacked flats or whatever, thinking about the corridors or the stairwells and all those spaces. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So Dave did put his question into the chat. He says, due to zoning issues, we have our design completed. We are planning on sociocracy for Eco Village Charlottesville should we have sociocracy trainings now or wait until after, or wait for after the workshops, which is still not entirely clear to me. It sounds like they're doing more workshops.
Oh. Yeah, so in the context of this slideshow, which was about early design programming, I would say it's great to have a governance structure in place. And if you're not absolutely certain with it, but but if you don't actually have a lot of good sociocracy training or consensus training, make sure your architect does. That's where the co-housing expert architect makes a big difference. If you have really fabulous facilitators and you have a local architect who's got great green design, you love their houses, they've done some community homes, then, great. But, the one thing that's good about, I know, probably myself, if I must say so, but all the other sort of co-housing architects that are out there, they have so much experience with consensus and sociocracy, and they can help you learn it if you're not already really sharp with it. Yeah.
That's great. Very helpful. We probably have time for about one more question. I'll ask it if we don't have another one. So one more question. So you've just been talking about getting some process training ahead maybe of this. And I also heard you say at the beginning, go tour communities so that you've seen them. Is there another, like, before you first meet your architect, what's the prep? Like, what would you advise communities to do or advise members of communities to do before you begin this workshop process with them?
Read the books, tour. I guess when you tour, I think it's really important to talk to some communities, like find and go to the conferences. Absolutely, go to the conferences. Did you want me to say that?
Yes, please. Also the website.
Go to the website. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, conferences is great because then you can really ask people, you have time at over lunch to say, so what was it like in your design process? What would you do differently? And what I can tell you what we'd do differently, with not only in the co-housing that I live in, which I was not the architect for, but as the educated client, I can point to all the mistakes we made. And the first couple of communities, it's like, oh, I would do things a little bit differently now. Learn from their mistakes, but also their successes. Don't just ask them about their mistakes. Ask them about their successes. Because, oh yeah, it's so easy for people to see the glass half full. But if we have the best courtyard, in co-housing. We have, in my community, it's so beautiful and it has this great seating wall around it. And so you have to ask people also about what really works well. And so many architects move into the communities that they design. So, I think there's been a lot of good relationships there.
Great. That's excellent advice, I think. Thank you. And I think it's very useful in this forum for people to know, okay, what do you do even before you start working with an architect? I think that's great. So thank you.
Definitely the zoning, yeah.
And the zoning.
And seeing if you can find a developer partner. That seems to be a real hiccup.
Okay. So looking at zoning and possible developer partners.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So much really good information. I want to make a few more, I see applause happening. Well deserved. A few more announcements. The next web chat is 2 weeks out. Roland Ohashi is going to be back with us on the 29th, which is a Thursday, I believe, to talk about storytelling and telling the story of your community. So we'll be with Alan then. Other things to know about upcoming web chats, I have a fairly open schedule for presenters. So if you know someone that you just would love to have them do a web chat, you can reach out to them or send me their name and just let's get connected that way. And we're also looking for sponsors for web chat. So if someone would like to sponsor financially, that helps us with the production and all the expenses that go into making these happen, we'd be glad to recognize their support in that way. So if you know anyone who might be interested in that, we'd be glad if you'd send them our way. And I think that's the main things to tell you. There are going to be lots of exciting events in 2020. Karen and I have spent this week working on the planning for that. If someone in your community may have gotten an email from us saying, hey, would you like to help us work on that? Maybe host one, but be looking for that program coming out. And as a teaser, we'll let you know we're also going to do an online conference or two in 2020. So a whole new venue for us, and we're excited about that. So that's the news from the land of co-housing. And I think that's all we have. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.